exact same type of mind control. It's just officially state-sponsored.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, LGBTQ is the biggest subset of vulnerable kids on the internet. In my experience, kids who are kind of coached into believing that they're transgender or gender confused.
Now that we are aware,
on like 15 years ago, before I even understood that part, that was explaining that almost all the. Quite frankly, I didn't develop Optimal Human when Bigley came on as a big sponsor, and I told them the supplements I wanted from the companies I wanted. They went out and did what I wanted. People love them, and they're incredible. In the 1890s, do you think that's where we are now? No, it's a breakaway civilization, a breakaway system.
What do we all do now that we are aware that there are rogue factions with monopolized technologies running amok and without any oversight from the government and therefore the American people?
How in your life did you end up at some of the most secretive facilities in the world at the South Pole?
You know, Alex, that's a really fantastic question. And part of the process of my disclosure is kind of deciphering my experience and trying to get a full answer to that question. Currently, I have pieces and parts, and it's a very peculiar path that I walked from the Stargate program as a child to a very short, I would say, exposure to the United States Navy submarine service. And that path brought me to the Gold Coast of Long Island, working for some of the richest people on the planet that happen to be in groups that I know you're familiar with, such as the Council on Foreign Relations, the Trilateral Commission. And then, eventually in November of 2010, I found myself working at the South Pole Station for a year. I did not depart until November of 2011. That is a great shot. I remember that. That was the last plane leaving. And then we were stuck there for the winter all by ourselves. Since then, I've been working in other remote research facilities and other remote Arctic locations and just connecting with folks that I was, formerly crew members with at the South Pole, other people from the program in general. I've dipped my foot into the minefield of the disclosure community to try to connect with people that are interested in getting the truth out there. But unfortunately, what I've discovered is it seems to just be a massive COINTELPRO operation.
Describe exactly what they say this is and what the structure is. Looks very similar to what they found under the Great Pyramids, interestingly enough. And how you were able to figure this out. Was it at the time or years later, noticing that right when they turned it on, there was a giant earthquake in Christchurch, or what was that process?
Basically, when I was there, I was like a sponge. I was just absorbing information. I certainly was cognizant that, other things could be going on. Through years of research afterwards and conversations with other former crew members, I became cognizant of these supposed scientific research systems actually being directed energy weapons platforms. And there were technically 3 of them that I identified and testified in June of 2023 in Washington, D.C. in both of those skiffs that you had mentioned earlier. Senate Intelligence Committee and AARO were informed of the ice cube neutrino detector and its transmit capacity. They were informed of the ELF system being active, not de-energized and dysfunctional. The other platform that I mentioned to them was at AARO, A-R-O, at the South Pole Station, was a substantial green laser that I saw discharging from that facility, sir. And these are the weapons of war that exist, and I want the world to be cognizant of as they're being bamboozled by this ridiculous UFO disclosure circus, which is effectively just here to control the narrative, commandeer the conversation, and steer we the people of the planet away from these monopolized technologies we're all suffering under. There are folks in our world that have access to technologies that are unregulated. So, they're unbeknownst to most of us, and they're super advanced. And I just happened to work at one of these facilities that, the overseers of the planet are controlling and not letting us know what's really going on.
But that's really the story of history, is elites using information for control. The people perish for lack of knowledge. And so I call this a breakaway technocracy, a group of breakaway civilizations. What do you call it?
I think your word is fantastic. A breakaway civilization, a technocracy, I think works wonderfully. That's probably the best way to put it, is all of this boils down to the haves and the have-nots. It's really that simple. And you're right. It is the same battle that's been going on since time immemorial. And we deserve to reap the benefits of the fruits of our labor as a society. It looks like factions within our own government are now working to disinform the population. Again, I went to Washington, D.C. in good faith. What I found is that they're lying, but this is the current state of the union. The minefield of disclosure is that we have fake whistleblowers being supported by folks like Lou Elizondo, Christopher Mellon, government departments like Arrow. I mean, what's really going on? I know you know the drill, Alex. This is an absolute farce. Heaven forbid we discuss the monopolized technologies while, we have these clowns in the spotlight distracting everybody. Donald Trump suggested to the world that the United States has weapon systems that are, I'm paraphrasing, but, to the effect of, more powerful than people can imagine. And that's simply what I've been saying. Directed energy weapons is a word that you need to get in your vocabulary immediately. This is real stuff. This system is known to have caused the 2 earthquakes in Christchurch, New Zealand in February of 2011. This system has been accused of being I guess you would say like an air traffic control tower. So since it does detect neutrinos, as I discussed with folks in Washington, D.C., the concept that the unidentified UFOs have exotic propulsion systems that appear to emit neutrinos, it makes a secondary capacity for the neutrino array to be keeping an eye on all activity in the air, especially those of the exotic variant. If you look up information referencing earthquake induction or inducement of earthquakes, you can find that there's copious amounts of research going on for decades that show that it's not only doable, but easy to do.
Do you have any idea on whether or not Christchurch and these other events that always seem to be very politically aligned were done on purpose, or were they just testing it and doing things that had triggered it?
It was my understanding at first that the 2 earthquakes in Christchurch, New Zealand were accidental, that they were friendly fire. And I don't know that information that got to me was actually accurate due to an email that was leaked from Hillary Clinton around that time, where, I'm paraphrasing, she says something to the effect that she was happy that the earthquakes occurred and on cue.
I remember that, yeah, WikiLeaks. Yeah, there it is, and on cue. Unclassified U.S. Department of State, released in full.
Yeah, so these are the details that matter.
That is an excellent little 9-minute boil down of the hour-long interview I did last week with that whistleblower. Amazing information. All right, here's what I want to do now. I want to give the number out and take your calls throughout the next hour and 45 minutes or so, and I want to go to your calls quickly. I want to intersperse it with a whole bunch of other big breaking news that's just now coming in. And I also want to get into the latest on RFK Jr., who is just doing, again, a amazing job going after big pharma, big food, and really of the whole Trump administration. This is where they've moved the quickest, and it's not really getting the attention it needs, because the way Kennedy doesn't make it sound like it's controversial, the way they roll it out. But if you know how the law works, how he's live time right now, I mean, it is just amazing. So I spent a lot of time on this last week, but there's been new developments on that front. And then there's a whole bunch of other news. Excerpts of that big interview Trump did on NBC,